You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, good to be back alongside you.
It is great to be back alongside you, Eugene. I missed you since last week.
Well, what can I say? It's good that we're back here together then. Look, I was going to try to think of something really nice. I was trying to think of something like cool and pithy to say, but then I just couldn't come up with anything quickly enough, and it just didn't work. Thankfully, we're not on radio. We could have lost our FCC license with that pause I took there. People who come into the show like 3 seconds late are going to think I had like a mini stroke or something to start. But don't worry.
You know, the transparency is good. The transparency is good.
We're transparent and accountable here at Breakthrough News. I've missed you too, Rania. That's what I should have just said, but I thought I could come up with something better. Stupid of me.
There's always next time. There's always next week.
Next week for sure. Well, that was a new one. You sprung it on me. I wasn't ready for it. Nonetheless, I'm happy to hear it though. Nonetheless, here we are. Wow, that was a hell of a way to start. Let me just get back to my normal flow here. As I always remind you all at the start of the show, those of you who are watching at YouTube, whichever one of those makes the most sense, this would be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and hit subscribe. Hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to so that you can very easily access all of the fantastic content we have coming here from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek, which had a lot of great new episodes recently, including one with Avi Schleim, the famed historian, and I actually had the pleasure of being on one relatively recently, so definitely don't want to miss that. Don't want to miss anything else that we have coming. We've got people live on the ground in Los Angeles. We're doing everything that we always do, so go ahead, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get the notifications for the things that you have subscribed to. If you are watching on Free Speech TV, no need to do anything but keep watching, keep supporting Free Speech TV, and as always, shout out to the FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear there as well. Rania, other things you would like for our viewers to know as we get started?
Yes, I want to remind everybody to smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure that you are not only subscribed, but that you have notifications turned on so that you get a notification whenever we have new content or go live. And moreover, Eugene, I want to remind people who are watching that we are an independent media outlet. We run on donations from our supporters, from our viewers. So if you like what we do here at Breakthrough News, and if you are able to, please consider going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch like this very cool mug that I always have here when I'm doing my episodes of Freedom Side Live and Dispatches. Keeps me well hydrated. And most importantly, you'll be helping independent media sustain itself at a time when, Eugene, the assault just keeps getting worse. We are in an era of constant horrors that continue to snowball into even bigger ones, whether we're talking about abroad or increasingly inside the U.S., which I know we're going to be talking about a bunch on this show. And like you mentioned, we've got people on the ground. We're able to send people to go be on the ground when things get crazy with support from our viewers. So please, patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And a huge thank you to the thousands of you who already are patrons of Breakthrough News. I don't think we say it enough, Eugene, how much we appreciate the financial support from our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. Critically important and very relevant to our topics today. Of course, saying all solidarity to all the journalists in Gaza who are, doing amazing work under very difficult circumstances. And also to note so many journalists in Los Angeles on the front lines that are being brutally assaulted by the LAPD day in and day out, covering what is happening there. So let's move right into one of the most critical stories that is out there, and that is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue our conversation here by Ahmed Al-Nouk, who's a Palestinian journalist with Palestine Deep Dive, and also the co-founder and director of We Are Not Numbers. Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you here with us. I mean, it's Rania and I talk about this a lot. I mean, the scale of what's happening now in Gaza is so intense. I mean, just to read you a headline, this is the top headline from Middle East Monitor right now. Israel kills 80 Palestinians in Gaza on Wednesday. Most were seeking food. I mean, the combination of murder, of famine. I mean, I don't think there was ever a question of this being a genocide for some time, but now it just seems so undeniable that anyone who is trying to say it is not is in and of themselves complicit, it feels.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to say that these humanitarian zones, these humanitarian distribution centers are not actually humanitarians. They're the furthest thing from being a humanitarian. They are death traps. And Israel was forced to make these distribution centers in order to lure the Palestinians to come to slaughterhouses and to kill them all. And of course, Israel will not kill all the Palestinians who go to these distribution centers. They just want to kill the Palestinians slowly, and they want to tell the world that you see, we're good with distributing aid to the people. We're giving them food. But at the same time, they're shooting Palestinians deliberately in order to make the Palestinians so scared of coming to these distribution centers. So it's like layers above layers of dehumanizations, of dehumanization, of killing, of murder, of starving, of genocide. And there are no words that can describe what is actually happening in Gaza. And there are no words that can describe how I am disgusted with the Western media, the mainstream media, that still talk about these death traps as they are humanitarian distribution centers.
I'm really glad you raised that, because that's how they're being framed in the mainstream media, and the corporate media's complicity around the world in this genocide is just so massive when it comes to the way everything Israel does is framed. It's covered up, it's somehow justified, and then everything Palestinians do is, criminal or terroristic. And, you obviously were recently on Piers Morgan, and you did a really fantastic job of calling out the media complicity. You challenged one of the most common and really dangerous distortions in Western media, and that is that Palestinians who use violence against Israelis do it because they're Jewish. And you made it really clear that the issue is not religion. It's the fact that there is an occupation that happens to be led by Israelis who happen to be Jewish. And they're targeted because they're occupiers, not for their religion. And I thought that was so powerful, that exchange. So I'm just curious if you could maybe explain, what that framing that we continue to see reveals about how Palestinians have been just so dehumanized and misrepresented in the media, and how it actually plays into and justifies this genocide.
Well, I was very happy and very angry at Piers Morgan when he asked me these questions. I was very happy because I wanted to address this point, because there are a lot of misconceptions here in Europe, especially in Europe. I don't know about the US, I've never been there. But I was very angry that me, a Palestinian who lost all of his family, I was very angry that I had to go through these conversations. I did not need to tell the world that we Palestinians, we don't have a problem with the Jewish people, that we don't hate the Jews, that we don't want to kill the Jews. We did not need to do that. I did not need to state that. It should be taken for granted. But unfortunately, here in Europe, there are a lot of misconceptions. Everyone thinks that we have a problem with the Jews. And for God's sake, it doesn't matter how many times we say it, we state it out loud that we don't have a problem with the Jews, that our problem is with Israel, that our problem is with Zionism, that our problem is with colonialism, our problem with these militias who came 77 years ago to Palestine, kicked us out, killed thousands and thousands of Palestinians, and took our lands, took our homes, and they started their own state on it. We have a problem with that. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many times we say that. Doesn't matter how many times we state that. The media will always frame us as the Palestinians who are anti-Semites. And sometimes I understand why I say that, because many of the European people, the white European people, have this huge guilt over what happened in the Holocaust. And I agree with them. They should have this guilt. These people, they massacred the Jews. These people are the real anti-Semites. We never had a problem with the Jews. And now they're having this guilt, but unfortunately, they're using their own guilt on the wrong direction. If we are anti-racism, if we are anti genocide, then we should be consistent with what we say, with what we do. We should not hate a genocide that happened 80 years ago and then support another genocide that is happening right now in front of our eyes, 4K in our television. It's really hypocritic and it's really sad, and I'm really angry at this reality. We should be better than this. I'm just so angry that it's been 20 months, 20 months of genocide, 20 months of us here in the West watching a live stream genocide, watching thousands and thousands of kids being killed and slaughtered and torn into pieces just because they're Palestinians. And then after 20 months, we come and we host Palestinians to tell them that they're anti-Semites, that we want to hate that we hate the Jews, that we want to kill the Jews. And it's just too many layers of dehumanization.
You know, speaking of consistency, I mean, I think one of the other things we see from Western nations, they're very, they seem to be willing to put sanctions on anyone and everyone at all times unless they are in Israel. And of course, we've recently seen a slight crack maybe in that status quo. New Zealand, Canada, Norway, United Kingdom, and Australia putting some sanctions on Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but not for what's happening in Gaza. Not that the things that they said don't deserve to be censured. But I wonder what you think about that, which of course is being trumpeted by those countries as a great method of accountability.
Well, Smotrich and Ben Gvir are horrible people. They deserve to be sanctioned, of course. But it's really funny for me because the UK and these other countries, they're sanctioning some ministers in the government in Israel for stating genocidal comments, and they're not sanctioning those who are actually committing the genocide, those who have ICC arrest warrants, being like Gallant and Netanyahu. If you really care about preventing a genocide, you should sanction all those who are actually perpetrating a genocide right now in front of our eyes. But of course, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they deserve to be sanctioned. It's hypocritical, and it's not really, it doesn't make any sense to me.
You have been involved in the book We Are Not Numbers, which is very important when it comes to amplifying and uplifting Palestinian voices, Palestinian writers, artists, journalists, especially in the climate of censorship and repression, where those kinds of voices aren't going to get a mainstream platform or sometimes any platform. And of course, somebody who was heavily involved in We Are Not Numbers is also Rifat El-Arir, who was murdered by the Israelis quite early on in the genocide in December of 2023. He was targeted, and he famously said that he will fight to his last pen. If the last thing if an Israeli soldier comes to his house, he'll throw his expo marker at him if he has to. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about the importance of Palestinians telling their own stories, uplifting their voices. Why is that a project you're so deeply involved with? It should go without saying, but so often the people who get the platforms to talk about this horrible genocide and this ongoing genocide, 70 years of it, plus aren't even Palestinian. It's often people who are a part of the group who are oppressing them.
Yeah, so this project started in 2000, after 2014, the war in Gaza, in which I lost my brother, my older brother. And then I was encouraged to write a story about this my brother. And at first, I refused to write a story about him because I thought no one cares about the Palestinians. No one wants to read the stories of the Palestinian. But my friend Pam insisted that I should write this story about my brother. And it helped me so much cope with the depression I had. It helped me so much tell the story of my brother to the world. And I really love the idea that, okay, I lost my brother, but writing a story about my brother might immortalize my brother, might make my brother familiar, and might make people, like help people understand the situation in Palestine. And I was only 19 years old back then. But then when I grew up and when I moved to the UK and when I moved to Europe and I found how much the Palestinians are dehumanized, how much the Palestinians are deprived of having this opportunity to tell their stories and share it with the world. The more I believe that our project is very, very important. Unfortunately, the reason why there is a lot of dehumanization in the West is because the Palestinians for the past 77 years, they never had the chance and the opportunity to write their stories and to share it with the world. And we are not numbers. We don't only tell the stories of the Palestinians, but we are training our writers, the young people of Gaza, to write their own stories to the world. And most of these stories that we're writing are personal, human stories that are written from under the genocide in Gaza. And I believe there is nothing more powerful than sharing your personal story with the world. Right now, when We Are Not Numbers, we trained more than 400 writers from Gaza to tell their stories and to share them with the world. And we published hundreds and hundreds of stories that will become a testimony for history. In hundreds of years, people will go back to We Are Not Numbers and they will read the stories of these young people in Gaza and they will understand the reality in Gaza as it is. And we are doing this partly because we want to break the stereotype about the Palestinians in the mainstream media, but also we want to educate the West about what's really happening in Gaza. And what's happening to the Palestinians. And I believe no one can really dismiss the stories of these young people who are coming from Gaza. And Rania, I'm very proud of our writers in Gaza. I'm very proud of the young people in Gaza because we're living a genocide in Gaza. I'm not in Gaza, but the people in Gaza are living a genocide. And they don't have their devices, they don't have internet connection, they don't have electricity, but they still write their stories and share them with the world. The number of stories that we're publishing right now in the genocide are 4 times more than the stories we published before the genocide. And these people in Palestine are very talented, they're very human, and they deserve a chance, they deserve a platform to tell their stories. And we are saying to the world, no more dehumanization of the Palestinians, no more sidelining the Palestinian stories, no more silencing of the Palestinians. We took it upon ourselves to tell our stories and to share them with the world. Because unfortunately, we have been failed. We have been let down by the mainstream media, by the Western media, by all the media. And we, the Palestinians, we will stop just complaining about the mainstream media. And we are creating our own platforms in which the Palestinian people write their stories unfiltered to the world. I'm very happy with all the alternative media outlets that there is. I'm very happy with the breakthrough news. I'm so happy with Palestine Deep Dive. I'm so happy with the many, many other platforms that are now emerging from from the people, and they're challenging what's really the mainstream, what's really in the mainstream media.
We Are Not Numbers is such an important book, and whenever I think about it, I always think about Ayman al-Hasari and his beautiful mural in Gaza of George Floyd and the hands, the Palestinian hand and the black hand, and I don't want to, it's a fantastic, fantastic mural and a beautiful mural that says so much. And it just reminds me that, states are obviously doing nothing, are really not acting. But this moment of so many people around the world connecting in a deeper way with the Palestinian cause, which is something that I think many of us felt here in Ferguson and many times with the Palestinians connecting with the Black Liberation Movement. That feels like such an important element of this as well, an important human element.
Yes, of course. I remember when we did that mural in Gaza, and and we also did, and We Are Not Numbers, many videos about the connection between the Palestinians who are living the oppression in Gaza and the Black people in America who are living oppression from the police in the US. And I believe we humans are all connected in a way or another, and all those who are oppressed are connected in a way or another. In many ways, actually, we are connected, and we should feel for each other. When I see a man who could not breathe because of police brutality, I remember the Palestinians in Gaza who could not breathe because of the genocide, because of the starvation, because of the blockade that lasted for the past 18 months. We are all humans. We are all brothers and sisters, no matter our nationality, no matter our religion. We feel for each other. And in We Are Not Numbers, we did not only feel that connection with the Black people in America and all around the world, actually, because the Black people have been suffering in Europe and all around the world because of this dehumanization and this racism that is spread all around the world. But also, we feel connection with the original indigenous people in the US, indigenous people in Australia, and we did the murals for Standing Rock, for example, the indigenous people in the US. And I believe that as a human being who has been oppressed his entire life, we should feel for those who are oppressed in different countries, in other places. And there is nothing that disgusts me more than people who are oppressed in their own countries, who have tasted oppression in their own in Europe, in America, and in the US, And until now, they insist on not feeling, not sharing with the Palestinian people. I don't want to go into much details, but I think people now understand those who I am referring to. If you do not feel for other people there, you should question your humanity. You should question your values. You should question your ethics.
Well, I couldn't say it better
Ahmed, well,
myself. Go ahead.
real quick, before we wrap up here, Ahmed, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can follow
Yes.
the excellent interviews that you do, which I know they can find on many platforms.
Well, I host my podcast for Palestine Deep Dive, so you can go to palestinedeepdive.org, palestinedeepdive.com right now, in our YouTube channel or Substack, and you find all our interviews. In Palestine Deep Dive, we try to center the Palestinian voices here in the UK because they have been neglected for so many years, and we try to center the Palestinian voices, the Palestinian narrative. We choose the guests, we pick the stories, and we decide on the topics that we're going to discuss in Palestine Deep Dive. So please watch our interviews and go to We Are Not Numbers and read the stories of the Palestinians who have been writing their stories from Gaza, from under the genocide. These people deserve to have their stories read and shared. So
No.
please do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're following it closely, and I hope everyone else does too. Ahmed, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much.
Rania?
Such a lovely person.
Amazing.
And really sharp. And I really do go check out Palestine Deep Dive.
Yes.
They've got Ahmed conducts really excellent interviews with fantastic guests, some of whom we've had on the Freedom Side Live. And so some of them you won't be stranger to, but really just great content, great person, and hopefully we can get him back on again to keep talking about the horrors in Gaza.
No, absolutely. Lost many members of his own family. I think maybe as many as 23, but continues to push forward. And yeah, We Are Not Numbers. Fantastic stories, great poetry as well that they're doing there. So please check that out. And big impact that book has had and will continue to have. So hopefully people can read it and spread it. Well, Rania, we are going to move on to another major story here. That is the ongoing reign of terror by immigrations and customs enforcement in the Los Angeles, Southern California area in conjunction with the federalized National Guard. And I think Border Patrol is there, LAPD, despite, claiming to not be down with them, more or less doing the same thing. But we're going to hear about all of that, and we're going to hear about people standing up and pushing back against these raids from our next guest, Michelle Zuno, who is an immigrant rights organizer in Los Angeles. Michelle, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the Freedom Side.
Well, look, it's an honor to have you here with us. I want to start with last night because, what took place in the march. I mean, people may have seen that the mayor, Karen Bass, she said that there was going to be a curfew at 8 p.m. She's been saying over and over and over again in all her press conferences, as has been the governor, Gavin Newsom, we support peaceful protests. We support peaceful protest. Tell people what happened last night, because it really feels to me that it was a real mask-off moment for the LAPD, Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I mean, last night we saw how this curfew is not even really being enforced, right, or respected by the law enforcement. Last night, thousands of Angelenos gathered peacefully at Pershing Square at 5 p.m. Then we march to LA City Hall to really demand ICE, right, the National Guard and the Marines out of Los Angeles. And then, when the demonstration arrived at City Hall around 6:30, a full hour and a half before the curfew, demonstrators were being brutally attacked by LAPD and LA County sheriffs, completely unprovoked, right? They attempted to kettle us. They shot flashbangs when we were just peacefully marching to the City Hall. Rubber bullets, were being thrown, and, trampling over people with their horses and declaring the march to be this unlawful assembly, right? And so we've been seeing this gross violation of our First Amendment, right? Our right to freedom, free speech, right? Our right to assembly. But clearly, right, these kinds of tactics, they're really just showing us the true nature of, what side the police is on, what side the law enforcement is really on, right? And it's actually not going to stop this movement that we're seeing here in Los Angeles.
You know, it's really interesting the way this has been so politicized as obviously Donald Trump is leading the charge here and those who support him. And you even have, I'm just sorry, I'm reading this like news alert from my phone, so forgive me for looking down. But you have a senator called Alex Padilla of California who was forcibly removed and handcuffed after interrupting a news conference by Homeland Security Secretary, which sounds pretty crazy to be removing and handcuffing a senator. But that said, and then I saw a clip earlier this morning when I was watching a segment about what's happening around what Trump is saying, and he was like addressing these military guys, and he mentioned Karen Bass's name, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, and everyone started booing. So there's this alarming aspect of, you know, the real politicization of law enforcement and the military in a very, you know, scary kind of way. But at the same time, we have to also remember the role of some of these Democrats. And in the case of Mayor Karen Bass, I mean, she was elected with some progressive support, but she's now enforcing curfews and, you know, backing the LAPD repression at least. I mean, the LAPD is not under the control of Donald Trump. The LAPD is under the control of the mayor of Los Angeles. So I'm curious, you know, what's your response to, I guess, her actions and the way leaders like her have been participating in the crackdown on immigrants, essentially collaborating with ICE in many aspects, while then also kind of being victims of this authoritarian power push by Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, we saw, right, that the Trump administration authorized the deployment of 2,000 National Guard members and 700 U.S. Marines to LA. You know, we've seen both LA Mayor Karen Bass and the California's Governor Gavin Newsom immediately object to this decision, right? They've had these press conferences condemning the Trump administration, but they've still done nothing, like you said, right, to protect the people from these ICE raids. You know, Governor Newsom, he is the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. So he can easily exercise his authority and tell them to retreat, right? Tell them to go home. But instead, he's filing a lawsuit, right, against the Trump administration. A lawsuit is not enough, right? These press conferences are not enough. These statements are not enough. And, you know, we've also seen, right, that Mayor Bass has condemned the administration, but she has also really condemned the people in a way for protesting, right, for defending our immigrant communities. She, like, you know, many others, especially like the corporate-backed media, you know, they've really zeroed in on to the really small percentage of people who are, you know, vandalizing property or supposedly looting. But that kind of terror does not compare to the true terror that we're seeing in our communities happening as we speak, right? It doesn't compare to the rage that we're feeling in this moment. You know, families are being separated as we speak. And so it also doesn't compare to the majority of what we see in these protests, right? Peaceful demonstrations that are happening. And instead of protecting its people, you know, Mayor Bass has set a curfew in parts of Los Angeles. And, you know, she's not really focusing on the major problem here, right? That our communities are in fear. Our communities are under attack. And so what is she doing to protect those families, right? And so I think that there's a lot of, you know, Trump versus California, but at the end of the day, you know, it is us, it is our immigrant community that is under attack. And what are they doing? They aren't doing anything.
No, I think that's an important question because I think it's an important framing about how we even got here, which I hope you can speak about, Michelle, because, I mean, it's not like ICE showed up and started handing out tulips to people. As you mentioned, there are these brutal raids that were happening, you know, sort of made for TV type raids. And by made for TV, I think even like Dr. Phil showed up at some of them. And, you know, obviously, Trump is the president. People who hate immigrants control Congress. So it seems to me that the idea that this is some sort of like out of control riot makes no sense. I mean, it seems to me like it really is more like people really don't have any choice but to stand up for their own rights if they want to stop these, you know, very brutal, terroristic, inhumane policies. I mean, I'm editorializing here, but it feels to me like it's important for people to have that framing. Like, it's not as if some people just, you know, woke up one morning and said, you know, hey, we're going to go do X, Y, Z.
Exactly, right. And this all started last Friday when we saw, these blitz raids happening all over the city. There was a huge community response to these raids, particularly in the fashion district of downtown LA. Community members were shouting out know your rights information, asking for their names so their families were aware. Community members have been only met with violence from these federal agents, from the police, from LA sheriffs, like I mentioned. They've been throwing flashbangs, injuring many people, including David Huerta, who is the California president of one of the biggest unions here in the state. And, it's been really a sight, right? And we saw in over the weekend federal agents preparing to raid Home Depots, right? In particular in Paramount, which is a city in Southeast Los Angeles. It's actually a couple miles away from me right now, and also on the border of Compton. And these are working class neighborhoods with a high population of immigrants. It's no coincidence, right, that they're targeting cities in Northeast LA and Southeast LA with these raids, given its highly dense populations, its big populations of immigrants, right? And the community response has been incredible to see, right? We're seeing that people are fighting back. They're saying, ICE, get out of Paramount, ICE, get out of Compton. We're seeing federal agents and LA sheriffs there really protecting these agents, right? And supposedly they're not collaborating, but we're clearly seeing that they're definitely in cahoots. And so, I think it's really the people's resilience, right, to stay in the streets that has really kept people like me to really continue to fight back. And we're actually seeing, some victories, right? DHS and ICE agents, they're lodging in several hotels in the county. And, the people have been successfully been able to mobilize and really demand that these hotels take them out. And we saw this happen in the city of Glendale. We saw this happen in the city of Arcadia. And so, we can't really predict what's going to happen next, but we know that the people are angry. We know that the people are full of energy to continue to fight back and protect their communities.
Michelle, obviously this is such a national struggle at this moment because the scenes that you're describing have been happening around the country, with immigrant communities being brutally attacked and families separated and people being thrown into detention and even deported. And at this moment too, I mean, I think the fear is meant to, or the intimidation, the violence is obviously meant to shut people up, to use fear as a tactic so people stop protesting. Because at the end of the day, that's what they want to hear. And of course, you also don't want to walk into Trump's trap, too, because he's trying to find any reason to justify invoking a harsher and more brutal response, which is why the repression has been so severe. So I'm curious if you can speak to why it's so important to continue to show up, to continue to loudly oppose this. Despite the fact that, they're really trying to intimidate people so that they just, stay home and keep quiet.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important to continue to come out to the streets. Last night, our demonstration was completely peaceful. There was families, that were there showing up together, chanting. And I think the fear, obviously it is coming from the administration, but it is also coming from the mainstream media, right? They're creating this narrative, right? They're really just hyper focusing on, these really small incidences of like cars, driverless cars, on fire, when it really ignores the whole picture of what we're seeing in the streets, right? And that's why, I appreciate independent media like Breakthrough News that is really trying to, show the reality, right, that working class people are experiencing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the mainstream media plays another role, and I think we're trying to combat that narrative by showing them that the people are not going to be deterred, that we're going to continue to, take to the streets, we're going to continue to assemble because that's our right.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and I think it's important to assert that. And I want to ask you about another question that I think is being, used to, in my view, dehumanize people there in Southern California, and that is the prevalence of Mexican flags at the demonstrations. Also, there have been El Salvadoran flags, and of course, many people who I personally, and again, I'm editorializing here, consider to be racist, are saying that, oh, well, this is a sign of like a foreign invasion, and that they don't really belong here. Funny, no one ever says that on St. Patrick's Day or Columbus Day. But anyway, I wanted you to just address that, because I think that's an important part of these narratives that are being put out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't ignore the reality that in Los Angeles, one of the biggest population is the Mexican population, right? And, there's a lot of undocumented Mexicans, but there are also a lot of Mexican Americans, including myself, right, that live here, that are from here. And I think that, my people, we have a lot of pride. And I think at the same time, like, we are a community that deeply protects one another. And so when we see that our community is under attack, like, that's why we're seeing so many people coming out to the streets, waving the flag, to really show that our community is not just going to hide in the shadows, right? That we're actually going to be out there, that we're actually going to make our voices heard. Oftentimes, like, the immigrant community has been characterized as the sleeping giant, right? That we won't fight back, that we're too scared. But in fact, it is the opposite that we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of people, a lot of young people that are mobilizing for the first time, right? That they're calling out their own actions in their own communities, in communities that we've never really seen actions like this, sparking up. So I think it is really important, right, that we also understand the makeup of Los Angeles, and a big part of that is the immigrant Mexican community as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's an important point. In Chicago, they dye the whole main river green in St. Patrick's Day, and there's Irish flags everywhere. If you go to New York on Columbus Day, there's Italian flags everywhere. No one ever says the same thing. So, I mean, it's unbelievable, but an important point, important actions that people are taking there. We really appreciate you being willing to join us, Michelle, and help us sort through everything that's really happening in Los Angeles. And as it develops, we may be calling on you once again, so hopefully you'll be willing. Thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.
Rania?
Eugene, I was watching the CNN, as I do,
Yes.
so you don't have to. And there was an entire segment, I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, with the former foreign minister of Mexico. And the segment was based around if he thought it was appropriate for protesters to be waving the Mexican flag instead of the American flag. And I'm just like,
I mean, it's
this is what you're
ridiculous.
concerned about?
I mean, look.
It's so insane.
It used to be Mexico until the 1840s. So there are families, Mexican-American families whose heritage stretches back probably 100, 200, 300 years longer, especially if they're indigenous, than Donald Trump's family in the United States. So, I mean, it's completely absurd on so many different levels. And like I said, I mean, it's just hard for me not to reflect on the racism, Rania, and because obviously, you're based in Beirut, but you are from the United States. Like any European-American holiday, it's like, Oktoberfest, let's all go out and wave German flags and eat bratwurst. It's all fine. No one ever cares. It's only when someone from Central America is like, let's wave the flag of our heritage, that all of a sudden it becomes some sort of evil, element. I don't know. And I saw someone, at Dissoon's Burkina brother was actually out there in Paramount with the Burkina Faso flag. And I was like,
nice.
Yes, let's go, I mean, why shouldn't you be proud of where you're from? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But if you're from Europe, it's okay. But if you're from Central America, especially, but also from Africa, from Asia, then you better just shut up and act American. You know what I mean? That's whatever that even means.
By the way, I just want to throw out that there are members of Congress in Capitol Hill who have Israeli flags outside of
everywhere,
outside of their offices,
waving
very proudly. Yeah. Well, the one flag that you wave, and it's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, let's keep the conversation going about immigration here, and we would like to turn to take a little bit of a broader step out, 20,000 foot view. Dr. Ben Becker, editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News. Dr. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, listen, honored. I'm just glad you said yes. You know, we're
Oh.
I am glad. I am glad. What if he said no? You know,
That would
look,
have been embarrassing.
it would have been very embarrassing if our own editor-in-chief won't come when we know we're struggling. You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, Ben, it's hard to kind of put this in context. Like, what is the scale of what we're seeing? I mean, obviously, we're seeing a lot of raids. Like, we know it's happening, but what do we know about the numbers? And is there something comparable in history like this? Is this like the biggest push they've ever done? Is it similar to something they've done in the past? Like, how do people sort of frame this in their mind in terms of the scale and scope of what Trump and Stephen Miller and others are putting forward here?
Okay, really important question, and it's requires a kind of a complex answer because it's definitely not the first time there were mass deportations. Mass deportations really get going after the Palmer raids, after World War I, where the first Red Scare essentially is when you see mass deportations, mostly of European immigrants and a lot of radicals, people involved in the labor movement. Then you have big deportation in the 1930s, where they were basically scapegoating Mexicans for the Great Depression. And they took a lot of Mexicans and Mexican Americans out, including citizens. And then in the 1950s, Dwight Eisenhower launched a massive operation that took maybe over 1 million people and deported them. Again, huge sweeps. And Trump has actually been citing that. He's like, well, people don't complain about Dwight Eisenhower. Why can't I do it?
Wow.
But, you know, in fact, in the last 3 decades, especially, there is a deportation machinery that has now been created in the U.S. government that is it's a full-time machinery. And so Obama, for instance, who was considered a friend of the immigrants when he was running for office and said he was going to pass comprehensive immigration reform, earned the terrible name, the deporter in chief, because he hit a record of deportations that, in fact, was not surpassed. The deportation numbers, I would say, can go up and down, and they have a lot to do with what's going on at the border. So, for instance, there's been some reports that actually Trump's deportation numbers are still, in some respects, lower than Biden's, which I know is a shock for some people to hear. In part, that's because of what actually happens in the sort of border region. If there's more people crossing and they're catching them and immediately deporting them, that would increase the deportation numbers quite a bit. If you're detaining them here, for instance, for longer periods and then not deporting them, that also could, in a way, lower the deportation number, even while it's increasing the detention number. In other words, these things, the numbers don't tell the whole story. I do think what Trump is doing, though, is not just the politics as usual. And we have to actually go beyond the numbers, that he is deliberately provoking, terror by launching large-scale raids at workplaces. And at this point, anyone who still believes that he is targeting so-called gang members is like deliberately deceiving themselves. They're a victim of their own self-delusion at this point, because Stephen Miller reportedly, and this was leaked, got up in front of a bunch of regional directors of ICE and was screaming at them, "Why are you going after the criminals? Like, get over to the Home Depots and the parking lots and start sweeping people up." So the fact that Home Depots were targeted in Paramount and other parts in California and then provoked this big response is not accidental. This was a deliberate decision of the Trump administration to launch very provocative raids against workers and against workers on the job, people who have kids in schools, people who have no criminal background that's been proven, people for whom there is no warrant. So it is a deliberate escalation. It might be because they just want to get their numbers up, but I actually feel that they also were intending to create a pretext or a context that would allow for the deployment of military forces into U.S. cities. I don't think that was a necessary or logical reaction to what was transpiring. In fact, it was pre-planned. They went into Los Angeles, which, as the previous guest said, is about half Latino, has a huge immigrant community, has over 1 million people who are undocumented in the area, and said, we're basically going to declare war on this area, and we're going to get it started with these raids. So that's what this is. It's not your normal even protest movement where something happens, then the masses rise up, and then the government says, "Ooh, I hope this protest goes away." I feel like this one was actually designed as a provocation because Trump wanted to raise the temperature in this country so as to deploy the military.
I heard that those are all really, really important points, and people, I think, very much need to understand that narrative of how you mentioned Los Angeles is basically a testing ground for this larger nationwide crackdown, and we're seeing it play out now. And it's not that Trump is obviously he's targeting immigrants. He's using the immigrant issue to go after people, but he's also targeting protest itself. Like, any protest against him is being framed as something violent that needs to be crushed. And obviously, he wants to deploy the military across the country to crush any protest against him and his policies. He wants to invoke the Insurrection Act. So I'm just curious if you can maybe break down how this deportation crackdown fits into this larger war on civil liberties, on free speech, and on political organizing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, last year everybody was talking about Project 2025. Yeah. This is another sort of aspect of it. The going after your political opponents in many different ways. And it is just starting with immigrants. There's also a concerted attack on the left. There's yesterday, over 200 organizations received letters from members of Congress, basically nonprofit organizations. Many of them are quite mainstream that service the immigrant community, essentially implying they're involved in illegal activity, trying to set the stage for them to be defunded in different ways. You have the National Guard being deployed now in Texas, over 5,000 that were requested by Governor Abbott. And that's in response to the No King's Day protests, which is were not called as immigrant rights protests. These were called as protests against Donald Trump because he's using his birthday, which is this Saturday, June 14th, as the occasion for a mass military parade, using the excuse that it's also the anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army. So, these protests have been called, and there's going to be thousands and thousands of actions across the country. And honestly, for those who have been to these protests, this is of a different character. It's actually a more liberal, progressive, in some ways a more middle-class audience that comes out to these protests in the last few months, although the protests themselves have become a site of different movements to converge, but they have no record of sort of rebellion, so to speak, as days of action. Very mainstream organizations that are involved in them, and they're calling the National Guard out on them preemptively. So Donald Trump is making the point that I think many of us who have studied history have been saying for a long time, that of course you start with one group. You start with the immigrants, you start with the radicals, but the whole point is to establish a new political and legal framework in which the right wing essentially establishes a form of political dictatorship. And I think that, we'd have to sort of get into the weeds of what kind of dictatorship that is. But the United States is not in and of itself this sort of bastion of democracy. In fact, the right to free speech and the right to be able to go out on the street corner and agitate, that had to be won by the labor movement in the early 1900s, meaning for, the first 50 years of labor organizing, you would be arrested just for that. Or for Black people to vote, that took over a century to win that right to vote. The right to organize a union, that had to be won in the 1930s after 60, 70 years. So this country has a huge, a long history of repression of basic democratic rights while still existing within the framework of you having the right to vote. So I think this is the agenda, is to sort of pull back people's right to organize, right to assemble, right to speak up, right to form unions, while still saying, well, no, this is a democracy. It doesn't mean that they're going to negate the very notion of democracy, but they're going to basically eliminate all the rights that have been won over the previous decades. That's their goal. And I think it's not a foregone conclusion that they will succeed. And I think in a way, it's an unfought battle where now tens of thousands, in fact, millions of people are coming into the streets, or if they're not coming into the streets, they're sort of liking it on their phones. They recognize the stakes of this thing. This is not just about Los Angeles, and it's not just about undocumented people.
Well, I think it's an important point that you raised there about the possibility of it's not a foregone conclusion they'll succeed. I mean, obviously, we saw the Sensenbrenner bill go down to mass protests in 2006. I mean, there's the Simpson-Mazzoli Act in the 80s, and there's different contexts, but nonetheless, not like Ronald Reagan was some, great lover of all, nationally oppressed people. You mentioned FDR and the raids of the 1930s. And of course, the famous San Antonio pecan sellers struggle, of course, was, in many ways there because of the impact of deportations, forcing people into the pecan industry because they were afraid to move around and work in different industries. And they thought they had them cowed, and they formed this powerful union and they fought back. And it's, historic in the history of both the labor movement and the Chicano movement. I mean, there's all these examples, I think, historically of this exact issue of these brutal sort of attacks and nativist attacks on immigrants that have been, like I said, brutal. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it, but it hasn't been the final word. And in fact, a lot of times immigrant communities around many others who are supporting them have been able to use these struggles to actually advance the ball a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you say, of course, when citing these historical examples, like everyone knows them and learns them in school. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I don't think most people, I mean, I think they're essential. They should be sort of second, like everyone should know them, second nature to know these examples of when people have fought back and won. But actually, these are the examples that are sort of deliberately obscured in history. And in fact, the fact that millions of people could have won legalization under Ronald Reagan, who had a very different line than Donald Trump, is something that most people don't know. Or the fact that immigrants, rather than being sort of just a force to sort of divide workers, which is how the bosses have always tried to use immigrant workers, that immigrants have also injected all this energy and life into the labor movement and made unions stronger. And in fact, unions have this other history that they can call on right now to try to rebuild their fighting strength. I think there's another example that might be more recent than everyone knows, which is 2020. Now, look, 2020 end police brutality? Absolutely not. In fact, the number of police killings last year was greater than in 2019. So the state and the racist nature of the police in particular is unchanged. But there were certain lessons that have to be studied, reviewed, and learned from in 2020, which is that Trump wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act in late May, early June of 2020, after the police station went up in Minneapolis, and then tens of millions of people came into the street. And it wasn't just like rebellions where people see things on fire. I mean, that was like the first period of that. But if you remember, these were like mass protests in every town and city, people of all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, all coming together. And in some ways, it was the largest protest movement in U.S. history. Some counted it up to 30 to 35 million people participated in a protest just 5 years ago. This month, 5 years ago, that's what was happening. Way larger than the current movement. Although this movement, I think today is sort of echoing it or sort of reminding people of it. But Trump wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. And at that time, the Democratic mayors across the country imposed curfews. And in a way, there was a similar logic to what your previous guest was saying about Mayor Bass, the idea that the local mayors can repress sufficiently so we don't need the federal government. And Trump wanted to go further. And actually, people defied the curfews in huge numbers. And the curfews essentially were rendered moot by the people's energy. And the Democrats had to back off of it at the local level. And then Trump, when he was carrying that Bible in front of the church in D.C., when they cleared it off with tear gas and he had the generals around him, that was supposed to be the moment that he was going to declare like some sort of insurrection act or martial law. But at that time, his Joint Chiefs of Staff, what's his name? Milley. Milley, he said it's not a good idea. He apologized for standing next to the president. In other words, the military kind of blinked. And that's why Trump wasn't able to take it a step further. And the movement got much, much larger. It was supposed to be a moment of mass repression. And in fact, it became a moment of mass mobilization, and it got even wider. So now Trump has really stacked his cabinet, including Pete Hegseth, with a bunch of loyalists. He's learning the lesson and saying we can no longer have sort of an independent judiciary or an independent Department of Justice or even an independent military. All these things have to be staffed with people who will do as I say. But and so he's hoping that if he goes that next step this time and invokes the Insurrection Act, there will be nothing to stop him. But I think from the standpoint of people who care about social justice, there is this other lesson. And the other lesson is that when the masses of people come out in huge numbers, we actually can change the calculus. And in a way, we defeated the idea of martial law in 2020 and created this mass movement. And that's, in a way, necessary again today. People have to overcome their fear and show that, in fact, the working class, the people who want to defend democracy, want to defend free speech rights, want to defend their immigrant neighbors and coworkers, we are the actual majority. And yeah, they're going to haul senators out of press conferences. They're going to put troops on the ground. They're going to have, scary looking guys with horses and shields, but they are not the many. And so the question, in a way, has not been answered. The question has been posed to the population: will you accept this? But it has not yet been answered.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see what answers are delivered by the people. A lot to keep following, and we will continue to keep following. And like I said, keep following Breakthrough. We have people live on the ground. We have analysts here on the Freedom side and other programs, so we have you covered from all angles. Dr. Ben Becker, editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, this is a really, really scary moment, I gotta say. But that said, it's at moments like this when people need to be braver and not let that fear paralyze them. Because it's just crazy. It's crazy. You see what this guy's saying, and he's literally just any protest against him is criminal. That's what him and his supporters are saying, and we have to believe them when they say that. So very important stuff Ben just broke down.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, you said it. Maya Angelou said it. Believe people when they tell you who they are the first time. Rania, I wanted to check in with you. I mentioned earlier in the show you're based in Beirut. Last time when we were talking last week, Beirut was under bombing. I guess I know a little bit about the situation, but maybe just fill us in. What has been happening there? I think I saw something even a couple days ago, so I don't think this has been an ongoing issue since last Thursday. It wasn't just a one and done, I don't believe.
Yeah, so last Thursday, when we were live streaming last Thursday, I was quite distraught, as people might remember who were watching, because as we were live streaming, the Israelis had announced that they were going to bomb several buildings in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And it was, they do these Twitter warnings when they feel like warning, I guess, saying, you must evacuate. This is Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure. And then it got really chaotic, obviously, because people near these buildings got really scared. The Israelis said they were going to hit something underground, which meant they were going to use bunker buster bombs, which can down buildings and kind of destroy everything around them. And so I think there was maybe 5 or more different strikes in the southern suburbs of Beirut, as well as then in the south. And the thing about this is, there's supposedly been a ceasefire in Lebanon since last November. And that ceasefire was all about, Hezbollah disarming up to the Litani River. Beirut is north of the Litani River, far north of the Litani River. So Israel has repeatedly bombed Lebanon. There's been over 1,000, maybe thousands of ceasefire violations at this point. They've killed several Lebanese people after the ceasefire went into effect. Ceasefire means one side has ceased firing because there have been no violations by the Lebanese side, while Israel just gets to fire whenever it pleases. With zero consequences. And that's basically how the region is right now. Israel just bombs all of its neighbors and nobody's ever supposed to fight or hit back. So that's the situation we're in. And, I think that Israel is basically, first of all, they want to disarm Hezbollah all across the country. And there is a government in power in Lebanon right now that the U.S. kind of helped propel to power politically after, Israel sort of pushed it through war. That the Americans and the Israelis are pressuring to use the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah so that Lebanon has zero defenses against this incredibly aggressive genocidal neighbor that has historically occupied it and killed its people. So it's a really tough situation for Lebanon right now because, Hezbollah is in a position where they're having to make some adjustments and kind of reconfigure and regroup after a really vicious escalation late last year, and they're just not in a position to be fighting another war at the moment. So they're not really falling for Israel's bait. But at the same time, it means there's not going to really be any response when Israel does this. So I think Israel's kind of also trying to test the limits of how far it can go before they can provoke a response. Because this is a country that is now in a perpetual state of war everywhere, always, all the time. We see in the media that the U.S. has actually evacuated its personnel from some parts of the region because they believe Israel is preparing to attack Iran. And obviously, if Israel attacks Iran, it's very possible Iran will retaliate against American assets in the region in places like Bahrain and Iraq and so on and so forth. And so anyways, you have a situation in Lebanon where the Lebanese army is being, kind of transformed into a PA style force that is acting essentially on behalf of the Americans and the Israelis to disarm the country and remove its ability to deter Israel. It's not a foregone conclusion, as you said earlier about, what's happening in the U.S. So we'll see how that plays out. But, before I hear your take on that, I do want to also kind of use this to segue into a perfect example of, oh, there goes my electricity. 1, 2, 3. It'll come back on. Lebanon, guys. But I wanna talk about a recent development in a case that has to do with Lebanon, Eugene, because it kind of explains the ridiculous hypocrisy and double standards that we see in the way that the U.S. and the Israelis treat this country. And that is with the case of this man who died a few years back. His name, I don't know if you've heard of him, Eugene. His name is Ahmed Fahoudi. And this guy was a senior commander in the South Lebanon Army during Israel's occupation of Lebanon. And the South Lebanon Army was a proxy force that carried out the occupation for the Israelis that was made up of Lebanese collaborators. So it was a militia that collaborated with Israel during that occupation. And this man I mentioned, Ahmed Fahoudi, he oversaw the notorious Khiam prison. If anybody's ever seen footage of Lebanese being liberated from prisons after Israel was kicked out by Hezbollah in 2000, many of those images came from Khiam prison, where the most brutal kinds of torture took place. And this man, Ahmed Fahoudi, he oversaw that torture, participated in torturing detainees, and in some cases, he's been accused of killing them and overseeing their killings. And you can go watch a really good documentary by a Lebanese outlet called Al Mahatta, which you can find on YouTube, that is specific testimonies from his victims explaining what they endured and saw, because many of his victims are still alive. This didn't happen that long ago. And they testify in detail about that. And I'm getting somewhere with this story, I promise. But all that said, Fahoudi fled Lebanon in 1998 through Israel and eventually ended up in the U.S. as that occupation was nearing its end, as the Israeli occupation was nearing its end, as many people who collaborated with the Israelis had to flee. And when he got to the U.S., he actually, people here say that he lied on a citizen application by hiding his past as a torturer, because he was actually sentenced for his crimes in Lebanon in absentia for the tortures and killings he participated in. And years went by, he becomes a U.S. citizen, he has this entire life and this entire family in the U.S. 2019 comes around, and this guy decides now's a good time to return to Lebanon. He's thinking that the statute of limitations for the crimes he was sentenced to as a torturer has run out. But because there was so much anger, he was actually detained by Lebanese authorities, and he was put in prison here. And that's when the U.S. government intervened. The Trump administration launched this full-scale pressure campaign on Lebanon, even kind of threatening sanctions to secure this guy's release. And while he was in custody, he developed cancer. And so he ends up getting released after all this pressure from the U.S. The Lebanese release him. His victims were so upset because they thought they'd finally gotten justice. And he was smuggled out of Lebanon by a U.S. military helicopter.
Wow.
And he ends up back in the U.S. and he died shortly after that from cancer. Okay, so now we get to today. Just in the month of May, his family sued Iran and sued Lebanon for his death, saying that they caused his cancer.
Wow.
And they won in a Washington, D.C. court. They won and they were awarded $8 million.
Wow.
So it's just this insane story, because this actual fascistic torturer who tortured his own people for Israel, his family just is getting an $8 million payout, claiming he's the victim of torture. I mean, the irony is insane. I'm assuming that money will likely be drawn probably from those frozen Iranian assets that, the U.S. seized and often hands out in these kind of politically convenient payouts to people who want to sue Iran for terrorism. But, this is just a textbook case of the U.S. shielding an actual criminal, a torturer, when they serve American interests. It kind of reminds me of the way that Nazis after World War II and collaborators with the Nazis in various, Western European countries were kind of saved by the Americans so they could use them against communists around the world. But this is a pattern of just, not just justice denied, but these victims being silenced. People here are very upset about it because it's reminding them of everything now that this case has come out. But I just wanted to give that as an example of just how absurd the Americans are when it comes to Lebanon, and the Israelis as well. That this guy who was a torturer, a known torturer, his victims are still alive to tell the stories, was literally dies of cancer, and it's blamed on people who resisted Israel's occupation in this country, while those people and their families continue to be victimized. It's just completely outrageous.
That's amazing. I don't even know what else you can really say about that. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, wow.
Yeah, people here are really upset. Like this story, it's very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts because their families were victimized in that disgusting torture chamber.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, this is sadly par for the course of the United States. As long as you're useful, they will shield you in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, I mean, I don't have much of a take. I mean, I think you pretty much said it all there. I mean, it's obvious that we're seeing a lot of shifts in the world right now, and I think one of them is the intensification of Israel's settler colonial project, right? Like in many ways, I think we're sort of seeing the collapse of the first imperial division of the Middle Eastern West Asia region, so-called Sykes-Picot status quo, and we're now seeing the second imperial division. I mean, you've got, Turkey and Israel essentially partitioning Syria, the Israelis doing what they want to do in Lebanon, and they've said with this greater Israel the whole time, like, this is what they want, right? On so many different levels and in so many different contradictions to sort of break apart the area as much as possible and expand their own land. We're obviously seeing it with the West Bank, where they're going completely to, we're annexing the whole thing. I mean, that's what Smotrich says. We're going for sovereignty. We obviously see what they're doing, there in Gaza. Who knows, how they will address some of these issues, including the Sinai, including Jordan. I don't think we should, rule any of that out in terms of even more Israeli land grabs insofar as they can, fragment people. I mean, the attacks on Iran even, which are like an attack on Iran in a way. But if you ask me, I think what they really want is not necessarily fully just to disable Iran's nuclear program, which they might not even be able to do, but I think to destabilize the country is a lot of what they're also hoping for as well with the Israelis in that context. So, I mean, we can see on so many different fronts. I mean, you can see them even along the Red Sea in different African countries making various moves, right now to establish themselves, Somaliland and places like that. So anyway, long story short, I think what we're seeing and what we've talked about a lot here on the show is, listen, there's a context to the U.S. pivot to Asia. And the context of the U.S. pivot to Asia is that the Western hegemony over West Asia, which is a critically important crossroads, cannot end. But if you're going to reduce the American military presence in that area, what they've been trying to do since Obama and haven't succeeded, you have to be able to crush any resistance from Arabs. And so what's the easiest way to do that? That is to increase the power of the number one enemy of the Arab people, and that's the settler colonial imperialist-backed project of Israel, and allow it to expand and to get stronger at all costs, no matter what the impact of it is. And I think it's criminal, it's disgusting. There's really nothing else you can say about it. I mean, they're willing to do a genocide to let it go, to make this happen, rather, is what I'm trying to say. And it really is just, yeah, it's a stain on humanity, for the whole history, I think, of our species on this planet. What's happening right now in not just Gaza, but the broader region, because it really is all interconnected on so many different levels.
Yeah, no, it's really horrifying. And I mean, at the same time as there are, collaborators from Lebanon to Gaza, I mean, you see the story about the Israelis paying these ISIS-linked gangs to hoard, to loot food aid, and to shoot at people. And to fight Hamas. And the sad truth is that there's always going to be people willing to do that stuff. But at the same time, there's also people who will always be willing to resist.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this moment is proving as well. Like, even in the darkest of circumstances, there will always be people resisting in Palestine, in Lebanon, even in Syria, and beyond. They're still doing it in Yemen. And also people around the world, and I think that's maybe a good segue into our next segment here, because people around the world are really stepping up and doing all they can because governments are refusing to. And so I'll give it to you to go on from there, Eugene.
Yeah, no, well, thank you, and I appreciate that. And obviously, one of the biggest elements that we have seen recently is the Madleen, the Freedom Flotilla, that attempted to break the siege in Gaza and bring some humanitarian aid in. Of course, the boat was seized by the Israelis. A number of people have been detained and deported, and I think some still being detained. So to get into all of this, we are very happy to be joined here by Wright, who is a U.S. military veteran who has participated in 4 Freedom Flotilla journeys and is now on the steering committee for the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. And as always, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you all. And all of your rhetoric just, educates us so much. So thank you all for what you're doing. Thank you.
Listen, thank you. And we're, just gliding off your energy. It's amazing what we've seen happen with these Freedom Flotillas. And I guess maybe the first question I'll ask is, what is the status of the people who are on the Madleen now? I know some people have been detained. Some people have been deported. Obviously, they were seized by the Israelis for, a totally peaceful journey trying to bring aid to people. Are people still being held? What's the situation there?
Well, our little ship, the Madleen, carried 12 people, including crew, and 6 of them were released, or 4 of them were released yesterday. 6 of them are being released today. Actually not released. They're being deported, for God's sakes. And the Israelis are saying it's a 100-year deportation. And the 2 times I've been deported, it's only 10 years at a time. So I can almost now go back into Israel if I wanted to, because I've been 20 years in this thing. But now we have 2 other people that'll be deported tomorrow. They're coming out with some interesting stories about how they were treated in the Israeli prison. Two persons were put in solitary confinement. 2 of them were on a hunger strike for a short period of time, just in solidarity with the people of Gaza. And this was after we sailed the Madleen less than a month after our other ship, the Conscience, was bombed in Malta. We had 40 people that were ready to get on that ship. We had been very quiet about the ship, trying to, kind of sneak under the radar. We told people in Malta, don't wear T-shirts, don't do any of this. But we know that the Israeli intelligence services track all of these things. And on the morning of the 1st of May, mere hours before we were going to board those 40 people onto the ship, all of a sudden, what appears to be some drones came close to the ship and then fired explosives and damaged the ship severely. The 16 people that were a part of the crew and 6 people that were kind of non-crew passengers they'd gotten on at the start-off point. Boy, the tales that they have told about how frightening that was when all of a sudden the bow of the ship just kind of blows up and then a fire erupts. And it took an hour and a half before a fireboat that was actually in the area finally came over and started squirting some water on the fire. We know the Maltese government was complicit with the Israeli government. We know that an Israeli C-130 was in the Malta area, circling around within an hour before this happened. We know that the Israelis have all sorts of sophisticated drones that they use on Palestinians, to include these, what they call loitering drones that can just kind of hang out, and once they're given the word in the target area, they just go do their work. And in that case, it was blowing a hole in the bow of the Conscience.
And it's just so insane how Israel has essentially normalized this kind of pirate-style hijacking of boats in international waters, because that's what it did in this case with the Freedom Flotilla. Is it hijacked it in international waters, right? Basically kidnapped these people, brought them to, I think, the port of Ashdod. I'm curious if you can walk us through what happened to some of them, because we saw reports of people being forced to sign statements, potentially being forced to watch a movie. I don't know if that happened or not, the Israeli propaganda film about October 7th. And then also in the case of European parliamentarian Rima Hassan and the Brazilian activist who was on board, they were placed in solitary confinement. So can you tell us what happened to people, what they had to deal with?
Sure. Well, it was a pretty standard takedown of our ships. It happened in international waters, and all of them have been in international waters. 2010, 2011, 2013, 14, 15, 16, 18. All are in international waters. The Israeli commandos boarded the Madleen non-violently, which was good, because they in 2010 they killed 10 people and wounded 50. And on other ships, they've beaten people up, they've tasered them, they've broken ribs. They've really been violent. This time, I think because there was so much attention on this little ship that they knew that they were going to get bad publicity on whatever was going to happen, so they kind of backed off a bit. But interestingly, they didn't leave the team of 12 on board the little Madleen, which normally happens, that you stay on board that boat and you slowly are taken into Ashdod. This time they put them on a Navy ship. And that's where we heard that they were going to be told that you have to watch this movie of October 7th that's put out by the Israeli government. I mean, none of us condone what happened on October 7th, that's for sure. But the fact that the Israeli government was saying, well, we're going to force you to watch this movie, and the response was, well, and we'd like to force you to watch the movie of the past 80 years of occupation and murders that you've been doing to the Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. So finally, they were able the ships got into the port of Ashdod. You're interrogated, you're fingerprinted, you've got photographs taken, and they give you papers in Hebrew. And we all, in the training that we give to every person that's ever been on one of these flotillas, we say, don't sign anything. You don't have to sign anything. You're going to get deported anyway. So no point in signing anything. And the Israelis will say whatever they want to. Like all of them signed that they were coming in illegally, when indeed they don't. But, you know, the Israelis lie through their teeth on everything. So once the four people opted actually to come out earlier, and we ask people in the training if they want to, and it's a group decision. We want people to come out early because they can tell the story. They can give the narrative of what happened. Whereas if we wait for everyone to go into prison and then slowly stream out, the Israelis have 3 or 4 days that they just keep talking whatever they want. So it was very good that we had 4 people, including an Al Jazeera reporter that was on the ship. We had Greta Thunberg that was on the ship. We had 2 others that were Sergio from Spain, and let's see. Oh gosh, I'm embarrassed. I can't remember the 4th one. But anyway, the 4 of them got off and started telling the story. And Greta, in particular, as she was transiting the Paris airport, had a long, long interview. And I'll tell you, that kid, and she is a kid. I mean, she's only 22 years old. And what she's accomplished so far in her life is amazing. And the fact that she was willing to go on this and knowing full well that the haters were going to go after her like crazy, which they've done. But, you know, she represents the younger generation in the finest way possible. And she knows the history of Palestine. She knows it. And when the reporters were trying to, you know, hand off stuff, she just went right back at them. So we're very proud of her, as we are of all 12 of the people that are on board. And there'll be more and more interviews with all of the folks in the coming days. So while they were in prison, you know, I've been in that prison twice, and you never can tell what's going to happen. It like in all prisons, it just depends on what the guards are, you know, what they're feeling like. And I think for Rima, what I heard was that she wrote "Free Palestine" up on a wall, and that was enough to get her put in solitary confinement, which I think she will say proudly the rest of her life that she did that. And the same for Tiago Avalos from Spain, from Brazil. He decided he'd go on a hunger strike, knowing full well that the guards don't like that, and so he got thrown in solitary himself. But all of these are parts of the procedures that we mention to people when we do the training, the nonviolence training that we have for every mission. It's so important that we know that people are going to react nonviolently rather than very aggressively and really cause big problems for everybody else on board any of the boats. So we go through very carefully people as they arrive and watch very carefully their reactions to violence that's wreaked upon them, because we cannot have them doing violent things back on this ship.
Well, Ann, I mean, it brings us to the backdrop of this whole thing, which is the ongoing, imposition of famine on the people of Gaza. I mean, it's not like the ship was loaded up with RPGs. You know what I mean? These are humanitarian missions that, could easily be let in, that are just trying to bring aid. I mean, that's the nature of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition going all the way back to 2010 to be able to, just create a lifeline for people there in Gaza. And to me, it just feels so criminal, even more so than anything else, that this is truly a mission of mercy here, and it's being treated as if it's some sort of terrorist act.
Well, indeed, and in fact, the government of Israel has always called us the terrorists, and in fact, as they steal our boats and take them to Haifa Harbor, usually, we've heard that there's a tourist tour of the terrorist boats. How about that?
Wow.
If you want to see how ludicrous this whole thing is, that here you have people that have come in from all over the world that are peaceful people, and all they want to do is to highlight the criminal acts that the state of Israel is doing.
Really amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Rania.
No, I just wanted to say, Ann, I think that these kinds of acts, that obviously this little boat is not going to be able to bring enough aid to Gaza to make, it's as Greta kept saying in her interviews, it's a penny in the bucket. There's no illusions about that, but the fact that it got the attention it did, I mean, I'd love to see hundreds of these flotillas sent to try to break the siege on Gaza. At this point, I think it was really brilliant to have a European parliamentarian on board, because we know the Israelis, for like days and days, they were freaking out because, I know it was very difficult for them to restrain themselves and not kill anybody. That is a very difficult thing for the Israelis to do. But they had to restrain themselves because of all of the cameras that were on this boat. And then there was the fact that there was a diplomat on it, which their own security people were saying, this causes a real problem for us because we can't really do harm to a European diplomat. I mean, not that I would say there's any red lines for Israel, but maybe they feel there are. So I guess my question for you is, why? Obviously, the boat's not going to succeed to make it to Gaza. There's a pattern, sort of routine of Israel, taking these people, kidnapping them from international waters, sometimes using violence. In this case, they didn't necessarily, and then deporting them. So someone might ask, what's the point if it's not going to break the siege on Gaza?
Oh, well, we have that question all the time. You're doing a very expensive thing, and you ought to give all the money to the people in Palestine, not people in Gaza. And so we ask the people in Gaza, we ask lots of NGOs there, would you rather have us donate money to, the fine work you're doing there? Or is it important that this thing called a little vessel tries to make it to the shores of Gaza? And every time they come back and say, it is so important, it's a symbol of worldwide support for us and solidarity. And some of the things that we see that, little kids go down to the beach in Gaza, and they make boats out of sand. They do all sorts of stuff. And it's really, it's a visible sign of solidarity, even though they haven't seen the ships in person since 2008, when we actually had 5 ships that actually got in. But since 2008, none of the ships have gone in, 35 of them that we've sailed. And we'll continue to sail them more. In fact, we've got another one that's just about ready to go. So we intend to push this as hard as we can. And if there are any sailors in the Mediterranean that have boats and want to join us, we are thrilled to have more boats as a part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla.
Right on. Well, if you're out there, people with
Yeah,
boats
to
in
all
the
the boat
Mediterranean. If you're a
owners watching
Breakthrough News
Breakthrough
fan,
News.
I demand that you bring your boat and participate.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, a fantastic initiative, and I think a critically important story and critically important work. And Wright, steering committee member of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. As always, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Free Palestine. Stop the genocide.
Yes.
Rania?
Anne is just so amazing.
Fantastic.
She's the energy she has. We all need some more of that. And I mean, I think this flotilla, like everybody was talking about it. It literally like put the spotlight on this horrific siege of Gaza in a really important way. And like I said, I mean, let's send hundreds of them should be. If anything, you know who should be breaking the siege on Gaza is countries who have ships.
Yeah.
Should be breaking the siege on Gaza. But all of these countries that are supporting Israel need to stop sending weapons and send their ships in to stop. They should do a no-fly zone to stop the Israelis from bombing Gaza. It's just completely insane what's being allowed to happen. So I mean, these people who, like senators in the U.S., were threatening to kill Greta Thunberg. I mean, imagine. It's just completely insane, this backwards world we live in. But the fact that there are people who are willing to put themselves, I mean, that's a really brave thing to do, to subject yourself to kidnapping in international waters by the Israeli military to try to draw attention to the starvation of people. Is a very brave thing to do.
Just want to note, huge protest in Paris, by the way, once the boat was seized in response to it. And obviously, of course, Rima Hassan, parliamentarian with La France Insoumise, unsubmissive France there. So a very prominent personality of Algerian heritage, by the way. Just thought I would note that in terms of people who have kicked out the occupiers and the colonialists in the relatively recent past. I think ultimately, Rania, that brings us more or less to the close of the show here. Anything you would like to remind our viewers of before we get out of here?
Well, there's apparently a sheriff in Wayne Ivy, an area of Florida. No, his name is Wayne Ivy. I'm so sorry. Sorry, his name sounds like a neighborhood. And Brevard Sheriff. So I guess it's part of Florida because Florida Voices has tweeted it out. He made a statement at a press conference, Eugene, to potential rioters. I'm going to quote him. He said, "If you throw a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you. Graveyard dead. We're not going to play." That is
well, for a Florida sheriff, I have to say that's pretty par for the course. They're known for being particularly brutal, going back many, many years to where they were deeply intertwined with the Ku Klux Klan. So he's following in the footsteps of his predecessors.
I mean, these people really feel safe enough to say those kinds of things. It's a crazy moment we're in, and I raise that just to say the repression we're witnessing and the corporate media complicity is like endless. And so I want to remind people that we here at Breakthrough News are an independent media outlet who are bringing you the news that CNN is not bringing you, and from a perspective that you're not going to hear literally anywhere in the mainstream, and honestly, in not very many spaces in general. So if you appreciate the work that you're seeing here at Breakthrough News, the analysis, the guests, the journalism, the on-the-ground reporting, the documentaries, which, by the way, I have one coming out very, very soon that I cannot wait for on pager attack, on the pager attacks here in Lebanon that Israel carried out late last year. If you appreciate all the work we're doing here, please consider becoming a member by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. For as little as $5 a month, you will be helping to sustain and help grow an independent media outlet that, I'm not just saying this because I work at Breakthrough News, but I really do believe it. Even if I wasn't a part of this channel, I would be watching it all the time because I do watch it all the time. I don't just do dispatches and go to sleep, guys. I'm watching the Socialist program. I'm rewatching our segments here at the Freedom Side Live. I'm watching Kay Explains. I'm watching the China Report. And I'm rewatching my episodes because my guests are so freaking smart. Sometimes I have to see what they had to say more than once to really absorb it all. So please do consider becoming a member. It helps keep all of this going and growing.
Indeed. You also read the comments, so watch out. Nonetheless...
I do read the comments.
It's true. Nonetheless, I really appreciate everyone who
Eugene, I have to also remind our audience, smash that like button, you guys.
That like button.
It helps boost us in the algorithm. In fact, after you smash this like button, after you're finished watching this stream, you go to all of our other recent episodes and you smash that like button too.
Smash.
Well, I wouldn't be upset if you did that. And shout out to all of our existing patrons. Thanks so much for everything you do. Thanks to all of our guests, for myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team. We will see you next time.